Hello, my name is Nick Miller, and I am the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director of the Lake Union. Welcome to our blog, Protest and Liberty. For this first installment, I've entitled it, Take a Knee. And we're going to talk for a couple of minutes about the recent controversy over the protests that are taking place on many of the sports fields of our country, most notably in the NFL just this last weekend. This was sparked more than a year ago by the actions of a quarterback, Colin Kaepernick, who started this protest movement. Colin Kaepernick is a black American, and he wanted to show solidarity with what he viewed as excessive brutality in some places in our country, in policing. He's a millionaire, in some ways insulated from much of this, but he wanted to make clear that he stood with his people. A lot of people have criticized him for this, including the President of the United States, saying he's being unpatriotic, that he's disrespecting the flag and the national anthem. But I guess I have a question. What does kneeling mean? It seems that Christians actually view kneeling as a great act of reverence, even more so than standing. So is Colin Kaepernick really disrespecting the flag and the anthem by kneeling? A little history here. To begin with, Colin Kaepernick began his protest by sitting down, and some fellow athletes suggested to him that this was indeed disrespectful, and they encouraged him to kneel instead. And I haven't spoken with Mr. Kaepernick, but my thought is Colin Kaepernick turns out to be a Christian. He was raised by Christian parents and is quite active in his Christian faith. And as I see this symbol, I think it's a powerful one of saying there's something higher than the flag and patriotism, and that is God and God's call for justice, fairness, and equality. And if that's what Colin is saying, I think it's a perfectly appropriate protest. All Christians should believe there is something higher than the flag, higher than patriotism, and that is truth and justice that God has ordained in the universe. And that is what oversees our country and our patriotism. A second point that people like to make is that why are these spoiled millionaires protesting? How are they oppressed? And yet I think we need to be careful here. The easiest thing for them to do is not to protest because they live insulated lives. Michael Jordan, a number of years back, was asked to support social justice and work against racism, and he famously said, or is reputed to have said, Republicans buy sneakers too. And he didn't get involved in politics because he wanted to protect his financial brand and not risk upsetting the powers that be. And so Colin Kaepernick, he's paid for his protest by not being hired for the last year in the NFL. And I can tell you that corporate America is going to be less likely to get athlete endorsements from athletes who are seen as protesting these matters. So in some ways, he's a little bit like Moses, who was unwilling just to accept the riches of Egypt, but wanting to take a stand with his own people on these important matters. And as far as it being a respectful protest, well, I think that, as I've suggested, kneeling is something that indeed shows respect and even reverence certainly for God, and a hope that our nation will live up to its ideals. There was another man a few years back who used to kneel regularly on the football field, and most Christians applauded him. You may remember Tim Tebow would kneel, not at the anthem time, but whenever he scored a touchdown, thanking God for his athletic abilities and for his accomplishments. So Christians are willing to applaud the kneeling of Tim Tebow to show piety, but not, many of them, to applaud Colin Kaepernick in seeking justice. And yet, aren't piety and justice meant to go together? I would suggest to you that as Christians, we should have room in our hearts both for Tim Tebow and Colin Kaepernick, that the gospel has been split into two halves, a pious half and a just half, and we need to bring those two halves together, because this, in fact, is what the Protestant Reformation was about. And that is Protest and Liberty today.